Joining us now, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us. And I do want to get to some of the details of what's happening on the ground in Florida right now. But I would like you to respond to what we just heard from Donald Trump. And in case you missed any of it, I will quote him here. He says he wants to congratulate the governors of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, who he says did a fantastic job. But the federal government has not done what you are supposed to do, especially in North Carolina. He says that you've allowed people there to suffer greatly. Your response to that?
There's an enormous federal response helping the people of North Carolina and all of the states impacted by Hurricane Helene. And if you talk to mayors, if you talk to governors, by the way, from both parties of these states, they are repeatedly saying that everything that they have sought from the federal government, from the federal response, they are getting. Look, this is going to be a long-term response. There was immediate work. People from day one, actually before day one, with the pre-positioning, came in because the administration knew they were going to need help. Right now, there are literally thousands of people involved in federal people on the ground involved in both the Helene response and the Milton response, hundreds of people just from our department alone. And look, I think the rest is just politics. We're going to focus on getting problems solved. And I got to tell you, when I have spoken to senators, governors, mayors, Republican, and Democratic, you would never know from the conversation which ones were the same party as me and which ones were a different party. We are all just focused on supporting people, making sure that life-saving work continues, and helping everyone impacted by either of these storms get back to normal.
We just listened to Secretary Mayorkas, and he said two things that some people may think are in contradiction with each other. So I want you to clarify a little bit, if you will. One is that the federal government can respond simultaneously to disasters. So he was on the ground in North Carolina. He is also obviously working on what's happening in Florida, just as you are working across multiple states. But he said FEMA will need additional funding, and he called on Congress to do that. Is there the money to do what you believe the federal government needs to do right now? And how urgent is the need to get more money?
Yeah, I think what Secretary Mayorkas is describing is a situation that we have our own version of it at the U.S. DOT, which is we have the funds to meet immediate needs, but we know that we are going to need more for the road ahead. And I'll give you some examples from the Helene response. We received a request for $100 million. That's the first emergency relief funding going to North Carolina. We were able to process that request immediately and get those dollars on the move. Another $32 million for Tennessee. Now, we have more funds in our emergency reserve account, but right now it's below $200 million. So certainly enough to meet immediate requests that are coming our way. But we know that there are going to be billions and billions of dollars of repairs to be done. Some of that work will extend into the months ahead. Certainly transportation-wise, I can tell you for a fact that work is going to continue into next year. So it may not be a matter of being unable to meet a request that comes into us today or tomorrow. But it is clear that in terms of the full response to this storm and more storms and more emergencies that are going to come our way, we just can't get it done without help from Congress.
So talk about some of the priorities, because you can't do everything at once, obviously. And I was thinking this morning as I was listening to Ron DeSantis, and he was saying they had already checked out some bridges, were able to reopen them. The assessment said that they sustained no damage. I'm thinking about the people who want to get back to their homes, maybe to homes that weren't, it turns out, in the flood zone. But they're wondering if they're going to be able to get gas along the way. So many different things that go under the umbrella of the Transportation Department. What are you prioritizing right now, Mr. Secretary?
So the biggest priority is supporting anything that's actually part of the recovery operations. Of course, we need roads back open for people to be able to get back to their homes. We also need those roads open for emergency responders to get to where they need to go. Similarly, with the airspace, some airports are still closed. Others are in the process of reopening. But we've also facilitated things that would not normally be taking place, like drone flights by the utility company, to be able to assess any damage to power lines and transmission. So across every form of transportation, we're starting with the priorities that are most relevant to immediate response and rescue operations, and then evolving toward getting back to normal. And again, on surface transportation, that's getting those roads and bridges inspected, making sure they're cleared to be returned to use safely. Already the interstate system is up and running, but there are more roads and bridges to be inspected. On the aviation front, it's making sure that the airports can be assessed if anything has been damaged. Think air traffic control towers, towers or radar equipment, making sure that's squared away so that flights can resume. And then the other area we're paying close attention to when it comes to the maritime dimension of things is the condition of Port Tampa Bay. The U.S. Coast Guard will be leading work to assess whether that can safely reopen. Lots of things need to be looked at, making sure the channel depths didn't change, making sure that any buoys and navigational aids that may have been destroyed or moved are back where they need to be. And of course, making sure the landside port infrastructure is in good shape. But part of why that's so important is that one port accounts for about 40% of Florida's energy that comes in terms of oil and petroleum products. So, of course, getting that open as quickly as can take place, provided it's safe, is a major priority on the maritime side.
You know, whether it's getting funding from FEMA or you guys making sure that roads are up and operating, ports are up and operating. I mean, to be honest, no matter how many personnel are on the ground and how hard they're working, it will never be fast enough for people who are in a crisis mode, right? And understandably so. So what's a reasonable expectation for what federal responders can get done in this initial 24 to 48 hours?
Well, the timelines are always going to be dictated by safety. There is extraordinary work happening on the ground with thousands of active duty personnel and federal employees helping, but there is always much more to do. I think the bottom line for people who have been directly impacted by this is they want to get back to normal. And up until that is possible, the next best thing is to make sure that they get good, accurate, useful information. And so that's been our focus. FEMA, and I'm at the FEMA headquarters right now after participating in a brief from all of the different federal agencies involved, which, by the way, is an extraordinary show of cooperation, tearing down the bureaucracy, everybody sitting together, quickly acting and working to get things done. But, you know, what people need from FEMA, of course, is to know what kind of direct aid and support they qualify for. What they need to know most of all, if they're still evacuated or sheltering in place, is to know when it is safe to move about. That's something that will come from local authorities and local officials. We're working to lift up and amplify those voices from credible, accurate sources of information.
So you say credible and accurate. We've heard from the president about this just yesterday. We heard from Secretary Mayorkas earlier this hour, and that is rampant misinformation. I mean, responding to a crisis of this magnitude is hard enough, but then you have this wave of, frankly, lies about response efforts. Aside from the issue of ensuring people get the help they need, earlier today, I want to play for you what Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost had to say.
Is it sets our people up to be taken advantage of by scammers and people who want to exploit us. One of the biggest rumors we've had to debunk is here in Florida, there was these numbers going around. Well, if you send your information to this number, to this link, you're going to receive this much money if your power goes out for this amount of time. I had to go on a press conference and say, no, there is no amount of money that's been picked. Individual assistance for this hurricane has not been approved yet because the governor has not asked for it yet because the storm hasn't happened yet.
Have you been surprised, Mr. Secretary, about how, frankly, and I use this word very loosely, effective these lies, this misinformation have been? Secretary Mayorkas saying, that it's made people reticent to even look for help. How do you combat that?
Yeah, this is not an academic exercise. This is a life and death response operation. And when people get bad information or false information, that has real world consequences. I've spoken to the FEMA administrator about this. She's leading extraordinary work. She's on the ground right now. And she talked about how the misinformation going around right now is just a multiple higher of anything that we've really seen before. And again, that has very real consequences if it can actively interfere with the ability of responders to serve people and the ability of people to get good and accurate information. And whether it's malicious, whether it's politically motivated, or whether it's just lazy, there is no excuse for circulating false information at a time like this, when what people need, just like you need power, you need shelter, you need transportation, you need clean, safe water. Something else you need in a situation like this is the truth, good information. And again, we will lift up those credible sources from local law enforcement and mayors to FEMA itself to make sure people get that good information and the help that they need.
Secretary Pete Buttigieg, you've been very generous with your time, and we thank you.